2 drinks and a sack of wheat, the price paid for the Apache woman the cowboy took home. Elia's heart had spent many years working as a cowboy across the open lands of Arizona, but the day he rode into the small desert town of Redford felt different from all others. The sun hung low and warm, coloring the sky with soft shades of orange that made the whole town look like it was covered in golden dust. Elias had been riding for hours through a dry stretch of land, and both he and his horse were tired. He decided to stop in Redford for water, a meal, and maybe a short rest before continuing home. Redford was a simple place, one main road, a few wooden buildings, and a handful of people who came and went without much noise. Elias liked towns like this because they were quiet. He was not a man who needed much. A warm meal and a calm place to sit were enough for him. He guided his horse to the watering trough beside the old saloon. As the horse drank, Elias brushed the dust from his sleeves and looked around. The quietness of the afternoon brought a sense of peace. A few men talked outside the general store, and a family walked toward the little bakery at the end of the street. Everything seemed normal, peaceful, and slow, exactly what Elias hoped for after days of traveling. When he stepped inside the saloon, the warm smell of cooked beans and coffee greeted him. The wooden floor creaked softly under his boots. Only a few customers sat inside, 2 older men playing cards, a woman sweeping near the doorway, and a pair of ranch hands chatting at the counter. Elias nodded politely at them and took a seat near the window. The bartender, a friendly man with silver hair, walked over. "Long ride today?" he asked. Elias smiled. "Long enough." He ordered a plate of food and a cup of coffee. As he ate, he watched the sunlight outside grow softer, casting long shadows across the ground. Everything felt calm, but before long, a small group of men entered the saloon, laughing loudly. Their voices filled the space as they took seats at a nearby table. Elias didn't pay much attention at first. Towns often had groups like this, loud but harmless. But something in their conversation caught his ear. One of the men slapped his hand on the table and said with a proud grin, "Can you believe it? 2 drinks and a sack of wheat, that's all it took." Elias didn't mean to listen, but their voices were loud enough to reach him clearly. The man continued speaking with a tone that sounded strangely boastful. "Never thought it would be that easy." The others laughed with him, though some looked unsure, as if they were not sure whether to be impressed or uncomfortable. Elias tried to focus on his coffee, but the sound of their laughter made him curious. He didn't like judging people too quickly, yet something in their tone felt unsettling, not dangerous, just unsettling. He turned his attention toward the window again, trying not to think about it. But then the same man spoke again, this time lowering his voice slightly. "There she is now, look." Elias' head lifted automatically, almost without him thinking. He followed the man's gaze toward the saloon door. Standing just outside, holding onto the edge of the doorway, was a young Apache woman. She looked tired, so tired that Elias felt it in his own chest. Her clothes were worn, her feet covered in dust, and her eyes held a quiet fear mixed with exhaustion. She wasn't causing any trouble. She simply stood there, unsure of where to go or what to do. The saloon grew unusually quiet as people noticed her. Not in a loud or harsh way, just a silence filled with curiosity and uncertainty. Clearly, she wasn't used to being in a town like this, and the people weren't used to seeing someone like her walk into their space. The men at the table stared with a strange mix of pride and expectation, almost as if they wanted everyone to notice her presence. One of them nudged the man who had been speaking earlier. "Go on," he whispered with a smirk. "Tell 'em." The man leaned back in his chair, folding his arms with a satisfied grin. "We helped her group today," he said loudly. "They came near our camp, looked like they needed food, needed help. We traded with them." "Traded?" someone at the bar asked, sounding confused. "Yeah," the man said casually, as if he were talking about buying a bag of apples. 2 drinks and a sack of wheat." Elias felt a small knot form in his stomach. The way the man spoke troubled him, not because of any danger, but because of how casually he described something that clearly affected the young woman standing in the doorway. There was no anger in her eyes, but there was a deep sadness that made Elias feel uneasy. The bartender frowned slightly and walked toward her carefully, speaking in a gentle voice. "Ma'am, can I help you with something?" She didn't respond. She looked around the room slowly, trying to understand the situation. Her shoulders were tense, and her hands held onto each other tightly as if she needed something to hold onto. The saloon patrons watched in silence, not out of fear but out of uncertainty. They weren't sure whether to speak, approach, or stay seated. Even the loud group of men became a bit quieter as they waited for something to happen. Elias noticed how the woman's eyes were alert, taking in every detail of the room. She didn't know who to trust. Her expression wasn't angry, just cautious and weary, as if she had been traveling a long time and had nowhere stable to go. Elias recognized that look. He had seen it in travelers who had lost their families, in young people who had been moved from place to place, in anyone who had faced more hardship than one person should. He had planned to leave town soon after finishing his meal, but now he found himself unable to look away. The young woman had done nothing wrong. She was simply there, quiet and unsure. The bartender offered her water, and she accepted it with a small nod. Her hands shook slightly as she held the cup, but she drank it gratefully. The men who claimed to have traded stared at her as if waiting for praise or acknowledgement. One of them leaned forward with a grin. "Go on, tell them we treated your people fair." Elias felt a deep discomfort settle over him. He didn't know the full story of what had happened, but he understood enough to feel that something wasn't right. People helping each other was good, necessary, even, but the way these men spoke about it didn't sound like help. It sounded like pride in something that should not have been taken lightly. Still, Elias didn't judge them aloud. He wasn't the kind of man who stirred arguments. Instead, he observed quietly, trying to understand. The young woman's eyes moved from the bartender to the loud group, and then across the room until they reached Elias. For a brief moment, their eyes met. She didn't look at him for long, but the moment was enough. He saw in her expression not anger, not fear, but a soft question, one that he didn't yet know how to answer. Elias' heart felt heavy, but he kept his expression calm. He didn't want to frighten her or make her more uncomfortable. He simply nodded once, a small gesture meant to show respect. She lowered her gaze again and stepped slightly farther inside the saloon, unsure whether she was welcome. The room remained quiet. People didn't know what to make of the situation. The men who claimed to have helped her people still watched her, their expressions mixed with curiosity and self-importance. Elias felt a small ache in his chest as he noticed how they looked at her, not with harshness, but with a misunderstanding of the weight of her situation. Elias finished his coffee slowly, thinking deeply. He wasn't sure what role he would play in this story, perhaps none at all. But he also wasn't the kind of man who ignored someone who clearly needed support. The sun outside began to set, and soft evening light filled the saloon. The young woman stood quietly near the doorway, unsure whether to step forward or leave. She seemed lost, like someone caught between two worlds, one behind her, filled with memories and people she no longer saw, and one ahead of her, filled with unknown paths and unfamiliar faces. Elias felt something shift within him, something gentle yet strong, urging him to pay attention, to understand, and maybe to help. He didn't know her story yet. He didn't know what had brought her here or what she needed. But he knew one thing very clearly. This moment was important, and he could not ignore the uneasy feeling that had settled in his chest. Something in the quiet way she stood, in the tired weight of her shoulders, told him that her presence in Redford was not simple at all. And as the evening grew darker, Elias realized that his journey home would not be as straightforward as he had expected. Something had changed. Someone had stepped into his path, someone whose story had already begun long before this moment. And though Elias did not yet know it, this quiet meeting in a small desert town would shape the days to come in ways neither he nor the young Apache woman could have imagined. Elias stayed seated for a long moment, watching the young woman from across the saloon. The room still felt quiet, as if everyone was waiting for something to happen, but nothing did, not right away. The woman stood with calm stillness, her eyes lowered, her hands carefully folded together. She seemed to take up little space, as though she was trying to blend into the air around her. The men at the table still whispered among themselves, but their laughter had faded. Now they were mostly watching her, waiting for attention, waiting for someone to comment on what they had done earlier. But the room didn't respond in the way they hoped. People were unsure, thoughtful, even a little confused about what they had just heard. The bartender tried again to offer guidance. "Ma'am," he said kindly, "if you need food or water, you're welcome to sit. No one here will trouble you." She nodded gently but didn't move farther inside. She stayed near the doorway, almost like she needed a quick way out if the room became too overwhelming. Elias could see how tired she was. Her shoulders drooped softly, and her breathing was slow and heavy, the kind that comes from long days of walking and long nights without proper rest. She didn't look afraid, but she didn't look comfortable either. She looked like someone who had been trying to stay strong for far too long. Elias set his cup down and stood. He didn't know exactly what he would say or whether she would even understand him, but he knew he had to do something. He couldn't sit and let the moment pass like all the others had. He walked slowly toward her, making sure his steps were soft and respectful. The last thing he wanted was to startle her. When he reached a few feet away, he stopped and spoke in a calm, quiet voice. "You look tired," he said gently. "If you need to sit down, I can help you find a place." She lifted her eyes to him, her expression unsure but not frightened. She studied him for a moment, trying to decide what kind of person he was. Elias didn't move closer. He kept a bit of space between them, letting her feel that she had control over the situation. After a few seconds, she nodded slowly. Encouraged, Elias gestured toward a small table near the window. "You can sit there if you'd like, it's quiet." She looked at the table, then back at Elias. Then she nodded again. He led the way, walking slowly so she could follow at her own pace. She moved carefully, taking light steps, as though the floor might shift beneath her. When she reached the table, she sat delicately, placing her hands on her lap. Her eyes scanned the room again, watching the people but not lingering too long on any one face. The bartender brought another cup of water. She accepted it with both hands, giving him a grateful nod. She drank slowly, savoring each sip as though water was something she had not enjoyed in a long time. Elias sat at the table across from her but left enough space to show respect. He didn't speak right away. He wanted to give her the chance to settle, to breathe, and to feel safe. The men from the loud table noticed what was happening and leaned closer together. "Well, look at that," one of them whispered. "Didn't think anyone would take her in," another muttered. "It's not like that," the first man replied quickly, though his voice carried a defensive note. "We helped her group, that's all." Even though their words were not harsh, the tone made Elias uneasy again. He decided to ignore them. Their remarks would only distract him from what truly mattered at the moment, the quiet, tired woman sitting before him. Elias cleared his throat softly. "My name is Elias," he said gently. She watched his lips carefully, listening with full attention. After a pause, she spoke a single word, "Naylan." Her voice was soft but steady. Elias repeated the name slowly, making sure he said it correctly. She gave a small nod, confirming that he had. "Naylan," Elias said again with a warm smile. "It's a good name." She didn't smile, but her eyes softened slightly, showing that she appreciated his effort. Elias continued speaking in slow, simple sentences, hoping she would understand at least part of what he said. "I'm going home soon. I live on a small piece of land not far from here. If you need rest or food, I can help." He spoke with care, choosing each word gently. He was not offering ownership or control, only kindness and safety. Naylan looked down, thinking. She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she touched the wooden table lightly with her fingers, tracing the grain lines as if trying to ground herself in something solid. When she finally lifted her gaze, her eyes held a mix of confusion and gratitude. She said something in her own language, soft, musical sounds that Elias did not understand. But the tone of her voice told him enough. She was unsure, but she was listening. He repeated calmly, "You're free to choose. I'm only offering help." Naylan lowered her head again, her hair falling softly over her shoulders. She didn't reject the offer, but she didn't accept it yet either. She was thinking, carefully, quietly, just as anyone would if they were in a new place with unfamiliar people. Minutes passed with the two of them sitting without speaking. Outside, the evening sky deepened into purple, and lanterns in the saloon flickered softly, casting warm light over the tables. The room had returned to quiet conversation, and even the loud group of men had grown bored of whispering and had moved on to other topics. Elias let Naylan take her time. He didn't want to push her into anything. He simply waited, giving her space to make up her mind. At last, she looked at him with one clear question in her eyes. Why? Why would he help? Elias understood the question without her speaking it. "Because you look like you need rest," he said softly, "and because everyone deserves kindness." She blinked, her eyes slowly filling with a gentle emotion, something like relief mixed with disbelief. It was as if she was surprised someone would speak to her that way. Not with demands, not with expectations, but with simple human warmth. After another long pause, Nayland nodded. It was small, but it was enough. Elias smiled softly. She had made her decision. But before they could stand, one of the men from the earlier group approached them. He wasn't angry, he carried more curiosity than anything else. Still, his presence made Nayland tense. "Leaving with her, huh?" the man said, his tone light but intrusive. "You'll want to know she's used to traveling, doesn't cause trouble." Elias looked at him calmly. "She's not going anywhere with me unless she wants to." The man blinked in surprise. "Well, sure, didn't say otherwise." Elias didn't respond further. Instead, he turned back to Nayland, letting her know she had his full attention, not the man's words. Nayland seemed reassured by this, though she still looked tired and unsure. But she stood slowly, gathering her small belongings, a simple cloth bag tied with string. Elias stood as well and offered her space to walk ahead toward the door. The bartender gave her a gentle nod as she passed. "Take care, miss." Outside, the night air was cooler, carrying the soft scent of desert plants. Stars glittered above them. Elias untied his horse from the post and gently placed a blanket on the saddle so Nayland could sit more comfortably. "I'll walk beside you," Elias told her softly. "You can ride, my home isn't far." At first she hesitated, her hand resting lightly on the saddle as if unsure whether she should accept such kindness. But she studied Elias' face and saw patience, not pressure. She climbed onto the horse with careful movements, settling slowly into the seat. Elias held the reins and began to walk. His steps were slow, so the horse moved calmly. Nayland sat with quiet dignity, looking around at the open land lit by moonlight. The desert night was peaceful, soft wind, soft stars, and soft silence. They didn't speak much on the journey. They didn't need to. There was something gentle in the space between them, an understanding that didn't require many words. Nayland watched Elias from time to time, studying the way he walked, the calm way he held the reins, the kindness in the way he moved slowly for her sake. She still didn't fully understand his intentions, but she sensed they were good. And after everything she had experienced recently, that was enough for now. By the time the lights of Elias' small homestead appeared in the distance, Nayland's shoulders had relaxed slightly. The tension she carried was still there, but less heavy. Elias looked up at the small home, grateful that he could offer even a simple place of rest. "We're almost there," he said gently. Nayland nodded quietly. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring. She didn't know how long she would stay or what path her life would follow. But for the first time in a while, she felt a small spark of calmness inside her, a tiny moment of safety. And as she and Elias walked together beneath the soft glow of the moon, a new chapter quietly began. Elias' small homestead sat quietly at the edge of a gentle hill, touched by soft moonlight. It wasn't a large house, nor a grand one, but it was warm, sturdy, and filled with the simple peace of someone who lived a quiet life. A small fence surrounded the place, and a little garden grew behind the house where Elias planted vegetables every spring. To Nayland, the place looked like a tiny piece of calm in a world that had become uncertain. As they reached the house, Elias stopped walking and gently held the horse. "You can get down carefully," he said softly. Nayland nodded and slid off the saddle in slow movements, her feet touching the ground with quiet steadiness. She looked around the homestead, studying every detail: the wooden door, the dim lantern glowing inside, the old rocking chair on the porch. She took everything in as if she was trying to understand where she had arrived and whether she truly felt safe here. Elias opened the door and stepped back, giving her space to enter first. Nayland walked inside slowly. The room was small but warm, lit by a single lantern that made the wooden walls glow softly. A table stood near the window, a shelf filled with jars of dried herbs, and a small stove in the corner. Nothing looked expensive, but everything looked cared for. She stopped in the middle of the room, unsure of what to do next. Elias followed her inside, closing the door gently behind them. "You can sit anywhere," he said kindly. "You're safe here." His voice carried no pressure, only calm reassurance. Nayland looked at the chair beside the window and walked toward it, lowering herself gently. Her eyes moved slowly, taking in the rest of the house. She noticed a small doorway leading to another room, probably where Elias slept. Another corner of the house had blankets neatly folded, likely for guests, even though Elias rarely had any. Elias moved around the room quietly, trying not to make her feel overwhelmed. He filled a cup with warm water from the kettle on the stove and placed it in front of her. "You must be tired," he said. "You can rest as long as you need." She held the cup with both hands, warming her fingers. She drank slowly, feeling the comfort of something warm after days of uncertainty. Her shoulders relaxed a little. Elias didn't ask her any questions. He didn't ask where she came from or what challenges she had faced. He knew she would speak when she was ready. For now, the house needed to feel gentle, not demanding. After a few minutes, he took a blanket from the shelf. "You can use this tonight," he said, placing it near her. "You can sleep here in the main room, I'll sleep in the back room." Nayland looked up at him with appreciation. She didn't speak much, but her eyes thanked him. She placed the blanket on her lap, smoothing it softly between her palms. Elias prepared a small meal, bread, cooked beans, and a few vegetables from his garden. He placed the plate in front of her. She ate slowly, as if savoring each bite, perhaps because good meals had not been easy to find recently. Elias sat at the table only after she began eating, keeping a respectful distance. He ate quietly too, not wanting to make her feel watched. After they finished, Nayland helped gather the dishes. She did it gently, almost shyly, as if unsure whether she was allowed to help. Elias didn't stop her. He simply helped alongside her, working in silence that felt comfortable, not awkward. When the dishes were put away, Elias lit a second lantern and placed it closer to where she would sleep. "If you need anything during the night, just knock on the door," he said softly. "I'll be in the next room." Nayland nodded, holding the blanket a little tighter. Elias gave her a gentle smile, then walked to his room, leaving the door open a few inches so she wouldn't feel shut out. When the light from his lamp finally dimmed, the house grew quiet. Nayland sat alone in the soft glow of her lantern. She touched the edge of the blanket with tender fingers. She had not slept in a safe place for a long time. The quiet around her felt unusual, but in a good way. She lay down carefully, pulling the blanket over herself. She listened to the faint sounds outside, the wind brushing against the windows, the soft rustle of dry grass, and the distant call of a night bird. Slowly, gently, her eyes closed, and for the first time in many nights, she slept peacefully. Morning arrived with warm sunlight slipping through the window. Birds chirped outside, bringing gentle life to the new day. Nayland opened her eyes slowly, surprised by how rested she felt. For a few moments, she lay still, letting the warmth of the morning sink in. It felt like she had stepped into a different world, one where nothing rushed her or demanded from her. When she sat up, Elias was already outside tending to his small garden. She watched through the window as he watered the plants and checked the soil, moving with the careful hands of someone who respected the land. She stood and folded the blanket neatly, placing it on the table. Then she walked outside quietly, not wanting to disturb him. Elias looked up when he heard her steps and he smiled. "Good morning," he said gently. Nayland nodded, returning a small, almost shy smile of her own. "Did you sleep well?" Elias asked in slow, simple words. She nodded again. "That's good," he said warmly. "Would you like water?" "Or breakfast?" Nayland looked at the garden before answering. She pointed at the plants, then at herself, asking silently if she could help. Elias understood. "If you want to," he said kindly. "You don't have to." But she stepped toward the garden, kneeling beside the small patch of lettuces. She began gently pulling out tiny weeds with skillful hands. She wasn't guessing. She clearly knew what she was doing. Elias watched, pleasantly surprised. "You've done this before," he said with a soft smile. She nodded. They spent the next hour working side by side. They didn't talk much, but the quiet between them felt comfortable. Nayland moved with calm purpose, as if caring for plants reminded her of home. Elias admired her patience, her steady hands, and the peaceful expression that slowly returned to her face. When the sun rose higher, Elias said, "Let's get breakfast." They went inside, and Elias prepared a simple meal. Nayland helped again, this time more confidently. She sliced vegetables, arranged plates, and stirred the pot with gentle motions. Elias enjoyed seeing her settle into the space, even if only a little. When they ate, she looked more relaxed. Not completely, but enough to show that she was beginning to feel safe. Over the next few days, their daily routine formed naturally. In the mornings, they worked in the garden. In the afternoons, Elias repaired tools or fixed the fence while Nayland tended the house, cleaned, or sorted herbs. In the evenings, they shared quiet meals. Elias never asked her questions that would make her uncomfortable. He didn't ask about her past or what had brought her to the town. Instead, he let her speak when she wanted. Slowly, she began sharing small things, simple words in her language, gentle stories about plants, the meaning of certain stones she collected. She taught him a few words in her tongue, and though he often mispronounced them, she smiled each time he tried. Nayland had a quiet strength. Elias noticed how she listened to the wind, how she touched the earth with care, how she paused to appreciate the colors of the sky at sunset. She brought a kind of peace to the homestead that Elias had never known before. One evening, as the sun faded into warm gold, Nayland sat outside on the porch. Elias joined her, carrying 2 cups of warm tea. He handed her one. She wrapped her hands around the cup, enjoying its warmth. After a moment, she spoke softly, pointing toward the horizon. She said a word he didn't recognize, but her voice carried tenderness. Elias watched the sky with her, pink clouds floating over the distant hills. He tried repeating the word. She giggled quietly, correcting him gently. That small moment of laughter felt like sunlight in the quiet space between them. Every day, little by little, trust grew between them. Not rushed, not forced, just naturally, the way seeds grow when given time and care. Elias respected her independence. He never treated her like someone who owed him anything. Instead, he treated her as a guest, a friend, and possibly someone who might become part of his quiet life for a while. Nayland, in return, began to feel that this small homestead could be a place of healing. Each sunrise brought her a bit more peace. Each evening she felt less alone. She didn't know what the future held, she didn't know how long she would stay, but for now she was safe. She had space to breathe. She had someone who treated her with gentleness. And in the quiet rhythms of their days, something warm began to form between them. Not romance, not dependency, but a gentle connection made from shared kindness and small acts of respect. In this simple homestead on the edge of the desert, 2 different lives began learning how to move in harmony. The days at the homestead passed gently, almost like soft pages in a quiet book. Elias and Nayland had slowly adjusted to each other's presence, moving with a calm rhythm that made the little house feel peaceful and full of quiet life. But outside the homestead, far beyond the garden and the warm glow of their lanterns, the world had begun to whisper. It started in the small town of Redford, the same town where Elias had first seen Nayland standing in the doorway of the old saloon. People in small towns always talked. News spread with surprising speed. At first, the talk was simple curiosity. Who is the quiet woman Elias brought home? Why is she staying there? How did he meet her? Some people asked out of harmless interest. Others asked because they didn't quite understand the quiet bond forming between 2 different worlds. And some simply needed something to discuss, because quiet towns often felt too still without stories floating around. One morning, a ranch hand passing through Redford mentioned the topic to the storekeeper. By that evening, 2 more people had added their own guesses, and by the end of the week, the whispers had grown into full conversations. Most were polite, even supportive, because Elias was known for his steady character and honest ways. But a few voices carried confusion, and a few others carried misunderstanding. None of these whispers reached Elias at first. He lived too far from town to hear the conversations that stirred behind him. His days were filled with working the land, feeding the animals, fixing fence posts, and tending to the garden, always with Nayland quietly nearby, helping where she could. But one afternoon, when Elias walked into town for supplies, he noticed a change. The atmosphere felt a little heavier than usual, as if people watched him a moment longer before offering the usual friendly greetings. The blacksmith nodded, but his eyes lingered with curiosity. A woman filling a water bucket smiled politely, then leaned toward her neighbor after Elias passed by. Elias didn't know what they whispered, but he sensed something swirling around him, something he wasn't used to feeling. He bought flour, rope, and vegetables, greeting everyone kindly as he always did. But even kindness couldn't quiet the soft questions that floated through the air. As Elias prepared to leave town, the deputy sheriff approached him. The deputy wasn't harsh or unfriendly. He simply looked thoughtful, as if debating something. "Elias," the deputy said, adjusting his hat, "can I speak with you for a moment?" "Of course," Elias replied calmly. The deputy lowered his voice. "I heard you brought someone home, a young woman." Elias nodded. "Yes, her name is Nayland." "People are curious," the deputy said. "Not upset, just curious. Some aren't sure what to make of it." "She was tired," Elias explained gently. "She needed rest and a safe place." "That's all." The deputy studied Elias' face and found the steady honesty he had always known was there. "I don't doubt your intentions," he said kindly. Just be aware that some folks around here may not understand what you're doing. That's all I wanted to say." Elias thanked him for the conversation and headed home with a thoughtful heart. When he arrived, he found Nayland sitting near the garden, sorting herbs into small bundles. Her soft expression lifted when she saw him, and she greeted him with a quiet nod. Elias smiled back, but the weight of the town's whispers lingered in his mind. Over the next few days, a subtle change settled over the homestead. It wasn't between Elias and Nayland. They remained calm and respectful with each other. The change came from outside, in the form of unexpected visitors. Early one afternoon, Nayland was washing vegetables by the porch when she heard footsteps approaching. Two men from town appeared at the edge of the property, waving politely. They looked curious, not unfriendly, but their presence still startled her. Elias stepped out of the barn, wiping his hands on a cloth. "Afternoon," Elias greeted them. "Afternoon, Elias," one of the men replied. "We were in the area and thought we'd stop by." They began the conversation casually, asking about the garden, the weather, the cattle, but after a few minutes their real interest surfaced. "So, the woman's staying here," one man said, nodding toward the house. "Is she planning to stay long?" "That's her choice," Elias replied simply. The men exchanged a glance, then nodded awkwardly. "All right then, we were just wondering." They left soon after, but their visit made the air around the homestead feel different, as if something unseen had stepped into their quiet life. Nayland sensed the change, even though she didn't fully understand the words spoken. She could feel when the air around the house grew tense. She could feel uncertainty in Elias' quiet sighs when he thought she wasn't looking. One evening, as the sun cast golden light across the hills, Nayland sat on the porch with a small wooden carving she had found in her bag. Elias joined her, sitting on the step below. She studied his face carefully, noticing the lines of worry near his eyes. She touched her own chest gently, then pointed at him, a silent question asking if something troubled him. Elias hesitated only a moment before answering honestly. "People in town are talking," he said softly. "Not in a harmful way, they're just not used to this." Nayland listened quietly. She didn't respond with words, but she lowered her gaze, her hands tightening lightly around the carving. Elias immediately regretted speaking too plainly. "You've done nothing wrong," he added quickly. "You're welcome here. I just want you to know what's happening." She nodded gently, but a shadow of concern settled in her eyes. Days passed, and the whispers continued to grow. Some people visited the homestead to see for themselves. They came with polite smiles, asking harmless questions, but their curiosity created an invisible weight that both Elias and Nayland felt. One particular afternoon, the same group of men who had spoken loudly in the saloon, those who had once bragged about their trade, arrived at the homestead. They did not come with anger or harshness, but they carried a kind of expectation, as if they believed they had a right to something. Elias stepped outside before they reached the porch, hoping to give Nayland space inside. The men greeted him casually. "We heard she stayed with you," one of them said, gesturing toward the house. "We were curious, did she tell you anything about her group?" Elias kept his voice calm. "She shares what she wants to share, nothing more." The men exchanged glances. One cleared his throat. "Well, we were the ones who helped her group that day. Might be fair if she spoke with us a bit. You know, just to check in." Elias understood what they wanted, not control, but recognition. They wanted someone to acknowledge their role, even though they didn't fully understand the impact of their actions. "I appreciate that you helped her group," Elias said kindly. "But Nayland chooses who she speaks to. I won't ask her on your behalf." The men looked surprised but not offended. "We didn't mean anything bad," one insisted. "We're just trying to stay informed." "I understand," Elias replied gently, "but let her rest." After a few more polite words, the men left. Inside the house, Nayland had watched from the window. She wasn't afraid, but she looked pensive, deep in thought. When Elias entered, she lifted her eyebrows in a question. "Friends?" she asked in simple English. "No," Elias said softly, "just people who wanted to talk." She nodded slowly. She seemed to understand that not everyone came with bad intentions. Some came simply because they didn't know how to understand her presence. As evening settled, something subtle but important shifted in Nayland's heart. She began to wonder whether her presence was causing Elias trouble, not because he complained, but because she could see how he tried to shield her from unwanted attention. She cared about the peace of the homestead. She cared about Elias' gentle way of living. and she didn't want to be the source of any disturbance. The next morning, Naylin woke early. She stepped onto the porch and looked out at the quiet land stretching before her. The sunrise painted everything in warm, soft colors. Elias soon joined her, carrying 2 cups of warm tea. They drank in silence, watching the sky. After a long moment, Naylin turned to him. She touched his arm lightly, then pointed at the horizon. A question formed between them, unspoken but clear. "Are you thinking of leaving?" Elias asked gently. She lowered her eyes and nodded softly. Elias' heart felt heavy, but he didn't show it. He understood. Her decision wasn't rejection, it was consideration. She didn't want him to face confusion or misunderstandings because of her. "You don't need to leave because of other people," he said in a calm, warm voice. "You're safe here." Naylin touched her chest, then his, then the house, then the sky. She was trying to explain something beyond words. "You can stay as long as your heart feels right," he said, his voice thick with quiet emotion. "And if you choose another path, I'll help you travel safely." Naylin looked into his eyes and saw sincerity. She offered a small, grateful smile. She didn't decide that morning. The choice needed time, quiet time, thoughtful time, gentle time. As days passed, Naylin continued to help around the homestead and continued to share peaceful moments with Elias. But she also watched the horizon a bit more often, as if sensing that her next step was soon approaching. And though neither of them spoke it aloud yet, both felt the soft pull of a choice that would shape the next chapter of their lives. Their bond remained gentle, strong, and respectful, yet the world beyond their quiet home had begun to knock slowly on the door. The soft days that followed felt both peaceful and heavy, like a warm breeze carrying a quiet message. Naylin continued to move gracefully through the homestead, helping in the garden, sorting herbs, and sweeping the porch with calm hands. Elias watched her, grateful for her presence yet aware of a gentle sadness forming beneath the quiet routine. The small signs were there, signs that she was thinking deeply, signs that her mind was filled with choices, signs that she was preparing herself for something important. Some mornings she stood on the hill behind the house, looking toward the horizon as if it carried a message only she could understand. Other afternoons she sat with her small wooden carving held softly in her palms, staring at it with thoughtful eyes. And some evenings she watched the sky for a long time before speaking a single soft word in her own language, words Elias didn't understand but could feel. Those unspoken messages sat quietly between them, gentle and real. One morning, the sun rose with a soft glow, painting the desert land in shades of pink and gold. Naylin stepped outside early, her footsteps light on the wooden porch. She wrapped her shawl around her shoulders and walked a few steps into the warm morning air. Elias followed soon after, carrying 2 cups of tea like always. He handed her one and sat beside her. The silence between them wasn't empty. It was full of unspoken thoughts, of shared quietness, of things both of them felt but didn't rush to say. After a long moment, Naylin pointed toward the distant hills. Her finger stayed in the air like a soft, lingering question. Elias looked at the horizon with her. "You're still thinking about leaving," he said gently. She lowered her hand and nodded slowly. He didn't try to stop her. He didn't push her to speak more. He simply sat beside her, feeling his heart tighten even though his voice stayed calm. For the next few days, Naylin moved carefully, as if she was preparing her heart for something difficult but necessary. She still helped around the homestead, still walked beside Elias in the garden, still shared tea with him in the evenings. But now, whenever she looked toward the horizon, a quiet certainty grew in her eyes. One afternoon, she approached Elias as he was repairing a loose fence post. She touched her hand lightly to her chest, then pointed again toward the open land. This time, her expression was clear, not unsure like before, but calm and decided. Elias set down his tools and stood before her. He didn't speak right away. He simply studied her face, gentle, thoughtful, steady. "You're ready," he said softly. She nodded. It was not a decision made suddenly. It came slowly, like dawn spreading across the sky. She cared about the homestead and the peaceful days she had shared with Elias. But deep inside, she felt a pull, a soft, steady call from her past. She didn't know where her remaining people were, but she believed they were somewhere out there, waiting, hoping, searching just like she had been. She wanted to follow that quiet call. She wanted to find the rest of her story. And though Elias wished the world would let her stay without pressure, he respected her choice more than he respected his own hopes. He nodded gently. "I'll help you get ready." Nayland gave a small, grateful smile, soft, meaningful, and filled with respect. Elias spent the next day preparing supplies. He packed food that would last several days, dried fruit, bread, beans, and vegetables from the garden. He filled 2 water skins, polished the saddle, and brushed the horse so it would be ready for a long, comfortable journey. Inside the house, Nayland packed her small belongings. She had only a few items: her shawl, her carving, the little stone she always carried, and 2 carefully folded pieces of clothing Elias had given her. She tied everything neatly in a cloth and held it close to her heart. The evening before her departure, the homestead felt unusually still. The air was warm and full of soft colors as the sun lowered behind the hills. Nayland sat on the porch, watching the sky, and Elias joined her quietly. For a long time, neither spoke. They simply watched the colors fade from gold to orange, then to pink. Their silence was not painful. It was full of understanding. Both knew that words could not express everything they felt, and both accepted that some feelings didn't need to be named aloud. Finally, Elias spoke gently. "You've brought peace to this place." Nayland turned her eyes toward him. She didn't speak, but her expression said she felt the same. "You came here during a hard time," Elias continued, "but you brought calm with you. Thank you for that." Nayland touched her heart gently, then the porch, then looked at Elias, her eyes warm with appreciation. She didn't need to speak. Her gesture held more meaning than words. They sat there until the stars appeared, a quiet farewell to the days they had shared. Morning arrived softly with a breeze that carried the faint scent of desert flowers. Nayland stood ready with her small bundle in hand. Elias led the horse to the front of the house, its saddle secure, its back brushed and smooth. "You can ride," he told her. "I'll walk beside you for a while." She nodded, climbed onto the horse with gentle movements, and adjusted her shawl around her shoulders. Together they walked down the path that led away from the homestead. The sky above them brightened slowly, welcoming a new day. Elias walked beside the horse, guiding it through the familiar land he loved so much. Nayland watched the scenery carefully: the gentle hills, the quiet desert plants, the birds gliding across the sky. They traveled in silence for a long time, each step carrying them closer to the parting moment. Eventually, they reached a small clearing where the land spread out wide and open. The path ahead stretched far into the distance, clear and peaceful. If Nayland continued on that road, she would reach small camps, quiet valleys, and perhaps, if fate was kind, her remaining people. Elias stopped walking and placed his hand gently on the horse's neck, signaling that they had reached the right place to say goodbye. Nayland looked down at him, her eyes soft and calm. She didn't look afraid, she looked ready. "This road is kind," Elias said softly. "It will lead you toward places where travelers often pass. Someone there may know about your people." She nodded slowly. "If you ever need to return," he added, "you'll always have a place here." Her eyes warmed with emotion. She lowered her head gently, showing her respect and gratitude. With slow, careful movements, she reached out her hand. Elias took it lightly, holding it with the same gentleness he had shown her from the moment they met. For a moment, they stood quietly with their hands together. The desert wind moved softly around them, carrying the scent of sun-warmed earth. "You've been brave," Elias said. "You've walked through many difficult days, but you stayed kind and gentle. The world needs people like you." Nayland's eyes shone with quiet emotion. She raised her other hand and touched her heart, then pointed at him, a gesture expressing deep gratitude. Elias released her hand reluctantly but respectfully. "Go with peace," he whispered. She gave a small, steady smile, then lightly tapped the horse's side. The horse responded gently and began to walk forward. Elias stood in the clearing, watching as she rode away, her shawl flowing softly behind her like a quiet flag of hope. She didn't look back, not because she didn't care, but because she trusted the road ahead and believed in the bond that no distance could erase. Elias understood that fully and felt no sorrow from it, only a calm, bittersweet warmth. As she became smaller in the distance, the morning sun wrapped her in soft light. Elias watched until she disappeared behind a curve in the land. Then he took a deep breath, feeling both loss and peace. He turned and began the walk back home. The homestead awaited him, quiet, familiar, and touched by the gentle presence she had left behind. The air felt different now, but not empty. Nayland's calm spirit lingered in the garden soil she had tended, in the folded blankets she had used, in the peaceful rhythm she had brought into his home. Days passed, and Elias continued his quiet life. But now the land held new meaning, because it held memories of someone who had walked with him for a short yet important time. And every time he looked toward the horizon, he hoped she was safe, strong, and surrounded by kindness. One day, many weeks later, a traveler passing through Redford spoke of a small group of people camped near a distant river, people who looked peaceful and well. Among them was a young woman who carried herself with grace and calm strength. Elias listened quietly, feeling a warm relief fill his chest. Nayland had found her way. Her story had not ended at his homestead. It had grown beyond it, continuing onto roads she was meant to walk. And though their paths had separated, the memory of their quiet, gentle connection remained, shaped not by what was traded or taken, but by the kindness they gave each other freely. A kindness that asked for nothing in return. A kindness that changed both their lives. And a kindness that would stay with them always.